All right. I want to talk to you tonight of Bemer in the world of diabetes. I've spoken on diabetes before, and I had a check that was in June 2011. And I have learned quite a bit about diabetes recently, having attended a conference of where there were about 120 medical practitioners and nurses and sisters and so on, and it was very specific on diabetes. So I listened very carefully, and I have adjusted my talk accordingly. Now, I just want to give you a couple of facts this evening. And just before I start off, I want to tell you that I'm recording this. I will try and put it on the blog site. I was a little bit challenged the last time I tried that. But if I cannot get it on there directly, what I will do is I will upload it to YouTube and then have a link pasted on the blog site, Bemer blog. But more about that later. Diabetes 2, or diabetes mellitus as it is also known, hence the abbreviation DM, has been growing in extent and in misery from about 350 million people worldwide to it's being guessed to about 500 million by 2030. That's only 15 years to go. 80% of this diabetes 2 is found in the underdeveloped countries, and Africa is really right on top of that. But in India, it is apparently even worse. South Africa has about 2.5 million sufferers, with an additional 1.5 million who don't even know they got it. And during 2012, 63,000 people died of the consequences of. So it's quite a serious ailment. And 40 to 60% of lower limb amputations are actually due to this diabetes too. Also something I didn't realize before the conference. Yeah, in 2005, every 30 seconds there was an amputation. And in 2013, it happens every 20 seconds already. And those are amputations related to diabetes 2. But if you think about it, every 30 minutes, there is a loss of limb due to landmines. And look how much profile that gets. Rightly so, but in diabetes, it is much, much worse. It is, in fact, then 120 times as bad. On the African continent, the situation around diabetes 2 is even worse. What I've heard there is shocking. But what we need about diabetes, and I'm talking as a complete non-medical person, of course, is education and awareness, prevention and motivation, and simple but consistent care, and managing this diabetes consistently. That is, in summary, what I got out of that conference. And the education and awareness is just that we should be aware of how bad this diabetes is and the cascading effect that it has in terms of all the terrible sicknesses that can grow out of diabetes. And prevention being so incredibly important, and the motivation of people who have it to take it very seriously. The worst consequences of this diabetes are foot ulcers and wounds that are very difficult to heal. There's a lot of pain associated with that. Peripheral neuropathy is really about how the nerves in your lower limbs are dying off as a result of these ulcers and wounds and poor blood circulation. And the vascular pathologies, these arterial diseases, blockages, make everything worse. That can also affect not just the legs, but it can affect your eyes, retinopathy, and nephropathy. That is trouble with the kidneys. And the worst I then heard was having no pain. In Africa, that is apparently a very big problem because people walk barefoot, they get injured, They develop diabetes, they develop ulcers, they develop wounds, they have a lot of pain. And then with time, the pain goes away because the nerves have all died. Then there's no pain. So that while they're sleeping, and this was quite shocking, rats can sort of nibble at your feet. They cause horrible wounds. And that is one of the biggest problems in the middle of rural Africa. I never realized that. Now, these neuropathy problems due to diabetics are really problems with the nerves. Over time, people with diabetes can develop nerve damage, and apparently some of those people have no symptoms. They don't even notice that they're losing their nerves, or nerve endings or nerve cells in the lower limbs. And then, as I said, others have symptoms such as pain, tingling, or numbness, loss of feeling in hands, arms, feet, legs. But it can happen not just in the extremities, it can happen in your kidneys, it can happen in your heart, it can happen in the digestive tract, and so on. And about 60 to 70% of people with diabetes have some form of this neuropathy. And the highest rates of neuropathy are among people who have had diabetes for at least 25 years. So when I heard this, I realized 25 years sounds like a long time, and it is a long time to have an ailment and a disease, a chronic one on top of that. But if you think you have it all under control and you live your lifestyle the way you do, and you don't notice that this neuropathy is actually growing in your legs in extent and seriousness, then that must be a pretty tough awakening to it. So it's always a matter of controlling the blood glucose, blood sugar, and cholesterol, and a couple of other things. And apparently, if you do suffer from diabetes, overweight is always a result of that. So sometimes it can be the cause, but sometimes it can also be the consequence of. Now, what does all this mean? Well, in those 3 days at the conference, I discovered microcirculation is really the key to it all. I put here a key because there are obviously other complicating factors. But just look at a couple of things here. The lungs consist of millions of alveoles, which have to facilitate the transfer of the oxygen into the blood and the CO2 out of the blood into our exhaling breath. The eyes, and yeah, if that doesn't work in the lungs, we can't even get the oxygen in that is available. In the eyes, behind the retina, we have blood vessels, and apparently in diabetes, there is a slow loss of vision as blood vessels in the eye deteriorate, and it can be done surgically. But if you could just improve the microcirculation beforehand to delay the onset of this or even prevent it altogether, or once you have a slight loss of vision already, then the microcirculation is the key to possibly improve it. Now, we don't have any clinical trials for that, but we have quite a number of anecdotal evidence and medical studies, but there were very small groups of people. But the results were even more surprising to the people who were treated with a Bemer. And the people that were most surprised were the medical doctors treating these people. In kidneys, the kidneys operate completely on microcirculation. That is how the urine is extracted out of the blood in the nephrons, and in those tiny little parts in the kidney. The whole kidney consists of these things. But if they leak and if protein passes into the urine, then we are already in deep trouble. All organs can suffer as the repair and regeneration is impaired as we get older. And this is one of the serious things also if you get diabetes. Then as you get older, because the whole system, I mean our organism, our body, is in a way, due to entropy, also slowing down, getting less effective, and so on as we get older. In the older person, the body then gives up because there are not enough resources around. But this diabetes can take hold wherever the organism is weakest. For some, it would be the eyes, for others, the kidneys, for others, an ulcer on the foot. But the ulcer is, of course, a very visible one on the foot, and you will certainly notice it. But in all this, the cardiovascular system is the most important. Why? Because the blood supply, supplying the oxygen, the nutrients, and removing the waste products is the most important aspect or basic aspect that keeps this body of ours alive. Now, diabetes mellitus is a metabolic ailment. That means the metabolism at cellular level is impaired. And there are two different diabetes. The one is acquired, diabetes type 2, and the other one is you're born with it. Now, we're discussing mainly diabetes type 2. And diabetes is something that starts in the background and is often not even recognized, or the parameters that lead to it are not recognized, because who of us is going for a blood test where they sort of check the markers like glucose levels and the it's a lipid something of cholesterol. There are a couple of markers that you can ask any doctor just to check, and then they take blood and they send it to a pathology laboratory. And it's not cheap actually, but it is worth doing every 3 years or so to see if this diabetes is creeping up on you. Because we're all living in a world with lots of sugar, lots of starch, lots of refined flour, and all sorts of other things. And you think you're drinking fruit juice from Woolworth and it's excellent for you. There's so many sweeteners in there that that is actually not a good thing either for you. So it's difficult to find your way in today's nutritional sort of chaos. And yeah, in South Africa, it's actually closer to 10% of the population suffers from diabetes. And maybe in 2 years already, there will be 400 million diabetes 2 sufferers worldwide. And the biggest consequence is really loss of limbs, loss of vision, heart attack, stroke, arterial sclerosis, kidney problems. Man, the list is actually quite scary. But its first sign already starts at the younger age, especially with our type of Western type lifestyle. I think, if you look at the fast food world and if you look at soda pop, as the Americans call it, and cool drinks, as we call it, the Cokes, the Fantas, and so on, drinking it occasionally is not a problem. Drinking it all the time and in bigger and bigger amounts is the scary bit. And these sedentary versus active children lifestyles between 4 and 8 p.m. shows you that 44% spend technology time, like me, in front of a laptop, not the best of things. And the active time is only 25%. So that's not good. And it gets worse as we get older, really. How does it all start? Well, the insulin production goes out of whack. I just call it goes out of whack. It's a very complex process, biological process in the pancreas. And this insulin um, gets produced in too little amounts. So when there's too little, the whole control of moving glucose to the cells is impaired, and too little glucose means there is too little energy production possible at cellular level, this ATP, this adenosine triphosphate, remember? And insufficient ATP over a long period means less biological effectiveness across the board. It depends how many cells are affected and where they sit. But that also results in poor self-regulation and failure of the cells to do what they should be doing. And to an extent, it happens to all of us, especially in the Western world. But as we said earlier on, not just there. If you think about the long-term consequences, the deterioration and blockages of blood vessels is again a key parameter in this, resulting in stroke, which is a blockage of blood vessels. Heart attack, which is a blockage of blood vessels. Kidney failure, which is a blockage of the smallest blood vessels, so that the kidney cannot do its function of extracting the urine and collecting it. Then there's gradual blindness and possibly tinnitus of the ear because of lack of microcirculation. And what is, of course, most visible and takes a sort of a gradual time is the gangrene, which can lead to amputation, and the vascular deterioration. The blood vessel walls have to be flexible, and up to a point of the microcirculation, there aren't even muscles around these blood vessels at all anymore. And then the endothelium, the very thin little skin around the blood vessel, also deteriorates, causing all sorts of problems. So, in all this, while I was listening to the speakers at the conference, I heard the word lack of microcirculation, impaired microcirculation, poor microcirculation, all the time. All the time. Now, this body of ours is very good at self-regulation. It is self-regulated, it is very networked, it's an integrated system, it's an optimizing system. And the most amazing thing for an engineering type like me is that our bodies are self-healing. But they can only be self-healing when all the self-regulation mechanisms, the physiological parameters are in place to enable the body to do this. These very four fundamental things. And this self-regulation can only really work if the biochemistry, with all its complex processes, of which there are literally thousands and tens of thousands of different ones that took many PhDs, many years, many decades to even plot on a piece of paper. If you look at the one on the left there, correction, on the right there, which is the biochemistry in the liver. Now, the liver knows what to do, and it's doing it under normal circumstances all the time. And the important thing in chemistry, in biology, is that the chemistry works exactly right. Not close enough right, but precisely right. Otherwise, it doesn't work. And we're not going to go into this at this stage. But what really happens with our bodies when we get ill, and also the progress of diabetes, it happens all at the biomolecular and cellular level. And that is where medicine is also going. You know, the medicine that we have today, in many ways, in daily practice, is really checking the red warning light on the dashboard of your car to find out there's something wrong in the engine. It could be the oil, but you don't know if it's lack of oil, oil pressure, or the wrong oil, or some mechanical problem in the engine. All you have is a red light. But when you dive down into the nitty-gritty, then you find out, in medicine at least, that the problem is at biomolecular and cellular level. Always. Not sometimes, always. It doesn't matter if it's a broken arm or a foot ulcer or it is a heart attack, or even something like Alzheimer. It happens at the biomolecular and cellular level. And it has all to do, going back to the macro level now, it all has to do with lifestyle. Our lifestyle is wanting because we're giving ourselves stress. We're giving ourselves oxygen shortage. That causes the cells to run anaerobically. At this detail level, it doesn't like running anaerobically. It can run anaerobically, but it must be a temporary thing. When you are, for example, running away from something, then you might be anaerobic for a short little while, or when you do high performance sport. Now, the lifestyle problems are really lack of regular exercise. And you know, when I make a list like this for you, I'm the biggest culprit of them all as well, because I know myself and I know how lazy I am. I much rather sit in front of my laptop actually than to do exercise. Maybe it has to do with age. I don't know. Poor breathing habits. Some people got to smoke to really make it worthwhile, you know. these poor breathing habits. Psychological stress. Life is full of stress. And the only difference really in our coping with stress is how our attitude towards it lets us handle it. If we have a negative attitude, if we are down very easily, then that psychological stress will be much heavier on us, and it has the same effect on the biochemistry at cellular level as having run 10 miles, when you're only used to 500 yards or 500 meters. The environmental stress that we all suffer from in the Western world. And when it comes to malnutrition, what I've realized is just about everything I like eating is actually promoting getting diabetes. Sounds terrible. I know. And I'm not trying to scare anybody or put a fear factor into anybody. But that disease is so terrible that you would want to find out what to avoid so that you will never get it. And yes, if you look at the percentages, then most of us won't get it. That depends how old we get and what our lifestyle is going to produce. One thing's for sure, the diabetic epidemic is much worse than bird flu or anything like that in terms of epidemic proportions. And the common factors to all these things really in the end is that our body could cope if there was good circulation and if there was sufficient oxygen. But because we eat the wrong stuff, that aggravates it. And because we don't move, we don't do exercise, then this lack of locomotion does its part as well. And this is the final picture, and it's not a pretty one. So the consequence of all this is, to express it a little bit in medical terms without trying to sound medical, there's a proliferation of sicknesses in the vascular region. In other words, if your blood circulation is shot, there's more of it coming. The importance of effective vascular functioning, I've already just touched on, but when you listen to experts talking about that for hours, it is a very eye-opening experience. And the importance of the metabolic balance at cellular level is extremely important for all ailments. It's not just diabetes, it's for everything that can befall us. And the significance of the combination of maintaining good vascular health so that we prophylactically, in other words, as prevention, can maintain good blood flow. That's important, even if we don't have diabetes yet. In a way, the way I understand it, we are actually all pre-diabetics. Did you know that? Even if you haven't got a sign yet, just watch your blood markers slowly over the years, over the decades, and you will see that if you live the lifestyle that most of us have to live in the Western world in a city environment, then we are pre-diabetics, like it or not. Regeneration after suffering injuries, wounds, and surgical interventions is very important. And we can only really recover once we have contracted something, diabetes included, ulcers and wounds included, if those injuries, those wounds, those surgical interventions will get enough blood circulation and oxygen and nutrients. And of course, the older we get, the system winds down. There's no doubt about it. Even if we are as healthy as anything at 80, we would not be able to perform mentally and physically as a 20-year-old. But the quality of life in the elderly is a very important aspect. And the significance of having good microcirculation is that the quality of life in the elderly can be maintained a bit longer. And we surely all want quality of life. So how can the Bemer help in all this? Well, quantifiably, repeatedly, and consistently, it improves the blood circulation. People, that is the one thing the Bemer does excellently, and it has been proven, it has been verified. This experiment can be done over and over and over, and we will always get the same results. It improves the blood circulation. The most important aspect of that one is it improves the blood circulation in the microcirculation. It enables almost all physiological regulation parameters such as partial oxygen pressure, ATP production, and many others to improve. Now, those are not things that you can do in a placebo effect. You cannot, by sheer willpower, improve the partial oxygen pressure, the ATP production, and a couple of other things. You just cannot do that. The Bemer assists in the important area of recovery and regeneration, but the aspects of recovery or that are important in recovery and regeneration are the same physiological parameters that maintain your ability to stay healthy and stay fit. You know what I mean? The same parameters that can prevent sickness are also the ones that exasperate uh, what's the word? Make it worse, you know? The key is really an unobstructed vascular system, which really represents a supply and removal road system for the body. In other words, an extensive transport system to supply the nutrients and oxygen to the cells and to remove waste products from the cells. Now, the blood vessel distribution is not very difficult, and I don't want to bore you with statistics here, but the arteries in our bodies have got a total length of about 11% of the total length, the veins almost 15%, and the microcirculation, in other words, those blood vessels that are smaller than um, zero point 0.2 of a millimeter and smaller than that, are 3/4 of all the blood vessels in your body. And if you had to put them end to end, you would get between 100,000 and 120,000 kilometers in length. That's about 90,000 miles, 80,000 miles. That is an incredible length of blood vessels hidden and folded into your body. And as I said earlier on, the microcirculation consists of blood vessels between 0.2 of a millimeter down to 6 thousandths of a millimeter. Now, 1 millimeter is a tiny little distance. And to look at a fifth of a millimeter, which is the beginning of the microcirculation, is already remarkable. But the exchange of nutrients, of glucose, of oxygen, and the reabsorption of CO2 and waste products back into the blood all takes place in the capillaries. And the capillaries are something like 5 to 7 thousandths of a millimeter in diameter. And that all has to work. So the Bemer therapy represents a real breakthrough in the understanding today of effective vascular functioning. Because effective vascular functioning, if you could see it under dynamic conditions and with the special visual microscopes that Dr. Klopp at the Institute of Microcirculation has to his disposal, we find that these researchers understand vascular functioning much better. Now, in the past, in the last, say, 20 years, what was investigated is how does the vascular system react to chemical treatment? Could we improve it? Could the medication maybe get through the vascular system easy or with difficulty? And it was difficult to get the active ingredients in the medication to the cellular interface because let's face it, if the last couple of millimeters in your capillaries are closed because of blockages or because they are just not working anymore, then you will not get the active ingredient in your medication to the cells. And that means the only alternative you have is to increase the dosage. Also, chemical treatment is very slow. It takes hours or days even to get to its destination. And with medication, when it comes to many ailments, not just diabetes, there's a relatively low efficacy. In other words, the efficiency and effectiveness of the medication. And of course, with all chemical medication, there are potential side effects. And sometimes the side effects are worse than the healing um, activation that this active ingredient can produce. Now, the Bemer treatment is a physical vascular treatment. We're not using chemistry. We're using a phenomena which was discovered uh, in real breakthrough research at the Institute by Dr. Klopp. And this breakthrough technology was developed in Germany in 1998. And it grew out of the old electromagnetic field therapy, which nobody really knew exactly how it works, if it works, when it works. Okay, and it wasn't consistent. But that has all changed because the Bemer treatment, although the active ingredient is an electromagnetic pulse of a very, very weak intensity, it is a physical vascular treatment. And we can see under the microscope that when the Bemer is switched on, there is an immediate response in terms of vascular flow and vasomotion, the dilation and contraction of blood vessels. It is side effect free, and it is compatible with all medication. So it's not throwing out medication, it's just saying medication, come on board. Now we can actually deliver it to the destination where it is meant to be used. And the Bemer physical vascular therapy produces certain effects. The effect, by the way, is not healing anything. The effect is at the microcirculation, which is 3/4 of the blood vessels, remember. What does it do there? It activates the dilation and contractions, which is a natural rhythm at these smaller blood vessels, which hadn't even been known 20 years ago. It wasn't even, medical science wasn't even aware that there was such a thing at that small diameter blood vessel. And how does it do that? Well, it has a very specific type of signal, and that signal is repeated in a very specific sequence, or call it a rhythm. And that rhythm is dependent, or rather the rhythm, yes, the pulse repetition rate that you push through the tissue depends on the diameter of the microcirculation you want to target. So it all sounds very complicated, but you don't have to remember anything of this unless you are particularly interested. There's a lot more behind it, of course. But what we have to recognize is that the Bemer physical vascular therapy doesn't heal anything. It works at the microcirculation in terms of vasomotion and does do it through a specific signal which is targeted at the tissue with a certain rhythm. That's it, full stop. The result is that the body's self-regulation system can now kick in and fix many, many things, including diabetes 2, the onset of it, the healing of it, the using less medication. Although I don't want to advocate here over this webinar that you just use the Bemer and then forget your medication. That's not the idea. The Bemer will do the things I'm telling you that it is doing. That is for sure, because it's a physics thing, and I can explain that. The medication that you use has medical reasons and medical effects, which I know nothing about, and you should never stop that. Let the doctor discover that his medication or her medication is now getting to the pancreas, to some other organ, whatever you're treating. Okay. And this Bemer signal configuration is really too complicated for tonight. But I just want to show you this picture. What we see here on the left is the artery, then we have a large diameter artery, then we have smaller arterioles, and the smaller arterioles, the larger arterioles and the smaller arterioles are necessarily of different diameters, and each diameter range has a different response in terms of the pulse repetition. So if you look at the larger arterioles, here we're talking at about maybe 120 to 80 microns, that is thousandths of a millimeter. We repeat that pulse 10 times a second, while in the smaller one, we repeat it 33 times a second. And the smaller one might be 50 microns or 50 thousandths of a millimeter. And the same on the venal side. Okay, so with this, the capillaries there in the middle. I'm sorry that I didn't translate the slide for you, but you can figure it out. Okay, so the whole point is that at the same time, the new generation Bemer is impacting the same signal, the same Bemer pulse, but at different repetition rates and different intensities. And the intensities you can choose on the machine, but the pulse repetition rate is fixed. And we've all seen, or most of you at least, the pictures. And I cannot show you the movies now on the web. It takes too long. The broadband here in South Africa isn't broad enough to do that. But before Bemer, we have a certain area in the tissue and we can see individual red blood particles. We can see individual small capillaries. And everything is open after 2 minutes of Bemer. But it's only open where the body wants to open it. That's another story for another evening. I'm focusing here on what this could all mean for diabetes. If we have closed capillaries and you have the Bemer on for 2 minutes, then already capillaries start opening in places where the body hadn't used them for a while. What does that mean? That means that the cells in the vicinity of this capillary will get their oxygen, their glucose, produce ATP, function properly, do all their chemistry right, and the body's self-regulation mechanisms can kick in. The immune system is another one that is directly influenced by the Bemer by having more white blood particles in the bloodstream. Here is just one on the lower wall. You can see it there over here. There's one. And they slowly roll along on the inside of the blood vessel wall. But already after just 2 minutes, we get a lot more released from the lymph nodes and so on. And that's what we want. We want these white blood particles. They are like policemen in the army and homeland security. That is looking in the body for viruses, for bacteria, for malfunctioning cells, for tumor cells, and for all the cells that are not doing what they're meant to do, like possibly the ones that produce insulin in the pancreas. Okay, so the improvement of physiological parameters after the Bemer therapy, say average on 6 weeks, daily treatment, is significantly improved vasomotion. Remember, that's a dilation and contraction of the blood vessels. A significant improvement of more capillaries, hence there is more blood flow. That's what we want for the cells to get fed and waste products removed. Almost a third increase in the venal backstream. That is, all the blood has to go back through the venal system, back to the heart and the lungs. And 29% improvement in oxygen extraction. People, you don't even need an hyperbaric chamber if you could do this. That's not to say we don't need the hyperbaric chamber. What I'm just saying is if your body would be able, without a hyperbaric chamber treatment, to extract more oxygen by a simple treatment like this, imagine how effective a hyperbaric chamber now would be. When the body is prepared, the capillaries are open, the oxygen is there now from the hyperbaric chamber, and the oxygen extraction will go up. And what does that mean? The healing power of the body will be improved significantly. And the ATP production, that's like saying we get more petrol in the tank of the car, or gas, as you would say in the US, okay? So the ATP production increases tremendously. And it makes sense because it's really it follows the improved blood circulation and the improved oxygen extraction and the improved nutrients getting to the cells. That is when these little generators produce more ATP. And to come back to the diabetes quickly, is here is a diabetic foot, a diabetic leg, where you can see the vertical axis is actually this dilation of the small blood vessels and the contraction. So that should be a wiggly line, but it is flat. And it really means that there is hardly any blood flow in the microcirculation. After a couple of Bemer treatments, after 1 month, there is a start of a squiggly line of the diameter changes over time. You see, the bottom is in seconds, and D stands for diameter of the artery in micrometers. So we're talking here at about 20 thousandths of a millimeter, and the variation, how this varies over time. And look what it looks like. The wound is much better. Now we have another month, and look at that. Now we have proper vasomotion. And that is all the Bemer does. And once the body has the proper vasomotion, many of these diabetic wounds will heal faster. I hope that makes sense, and I hope that is understandable what I'm saying. And remember, I'm saying it as a non-medical person. I observe the physics, and I have a photo, and I can compare the two. And in case you think this is just the best photo we got hundreds of these, hundreds. Some of them look much worse, like a diabetic foot, for example. I mean, in this conference, I've seen pictures that you wouldn't want to see ever, especially not on yourself or on your loved ones. But here's a diabetic foot with a gangrenous a toe that was going to be amputated. And in the end, they did do it. But look how the feet looked. These are really terrible pictures. I don't want to stick around too long for them. But after 1 month of daily treatment, it already looked a lot better. After 14 weeks of daily treatment, it looked like this. And this is the point. After 17 weeks of daily treatment, this is the result. Now, beat me with a stick, but I mean, if this is what we can get, I say can get, not will get. Sometimes it takes longer. Sometimes we're not as successful, but usually we are so successful. And we have seen it in the wound healing clinic. Some of you know that we have this paper that was written for us, not for us, it was research done by a wound healing specialist, Liesl Nodeer, here in South Africa. And in the end, she found that the Bemer, in part, assisted greatly with the wound healing, and in other cases, caused the wound healing by the mechanisms that are explained. Here's a lady bedridden with also an ulcer at the bottom of her foot. And it took a long time. But you know, if in a hospital, after 2 years of conventional therapy in a hospital, they cannot get rid of it, and the Bemer goes from that picture to the next picture in 6 months, and 2 months later to that, and just 1 month later to that, that is remarkable. Because they had 2 years' time to fix it, it didn't work, and then something as simple as the Bemer comes along, and suddenly it only took 9 months instead of 24 of no achieving anything. And macular degeneration caused by diabetes 2 is also a very serious thing, as I said before. And before Bemer therapy and after therapy, over about 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. Yes, we do get results. Is there a clinical trial on this? No, there isn't. There are too many ailments and diseases to do clinical trials for everything. However, when you get the idea that the microcirculation is important and you can improve it, then many things will improve. It's like when all rooms are dark, but you figure out that a little candle can actually put light into this, then it doesn't really matter which room you go into. You will always light up the room with the same candle. You understand the metaphor here? So can the Bemer effect be really explained? This is not a believe it and it might work for you type of gadget. In scientific and medical terms, it can be explained. We've got lots of research reports. Remember, though, that the whole Bemer revolutionary concept was only really discovered in terms of its effectiveness in 1998, 97, 98, 99. And it was only in the beginning of the year 2002, 2003, 2004 where research at the Institute of Microcirculation discovered what is exactly going on when the Bemer is switched on. Is it verifiable? For sure. It's like a physics experiment that can be done anywhere in the world if you have the same apparatus and the same conditions, which are defined, which are laid down, you will get the same results. Is it credible? More and more every day, every month, every year, as we get more and more reputable institutions, universities, medical people involved, improving what we are finding for over almost 15 years now. Who knows about it? Too few people know about it. Much too few. And there are two reasons for that. There's, of course, a professional paradigm that says you cannot have some treatment that works on everything. I agree with that, except if it is something like this analogy I took now with a light. If you take a light into any dark room, it doesn't matter what the dark room looks like, you will light it up with the same light. And that's all we're doing. Microcirculation is everywhere in the body. We can stimulate the microcirculation, and then the body will light up in those organs where it is needed. Understand? Are there studies? We got lots of studies. Not always clinical trials, we got some of those, but we got lots of studies. I've got about 450 pages. Unfortunately, it's all in German. For the English-speaking world, it's not much use, but I am told it is being translated into English. And once it is in English, we will make it available to anyone who wants to have a look at it. There is a wealth of data there, and it's becoming more and more every single year. But we've got 100 million cells in a human body. They're all different types, but similar in structure. A nerve cell, if you really want to know, today anyone can go on Google, anyone can go on YouTube. You can discover biology for yourself, which will amaze you. If you don't believe in God after that, you never will. But if you look at the different cells and how they function, they basically all require oxygen and nutrients to produce ATP. That is the real thing that keeps you and me alive. Every single morning when you wake up, it is because your ATP production at cellular level is working. There's a medical term for when it is not working. It's called you're dead. So in this human cell, there are these generators, these powerhouses, these utilities, the mitochondria, and inside the mitochondria, there are these little engines, and these are rotating engines. And if you're really feeling inquisitive and you feel bored, go to YouTube, type in ATP synthase or ATP generators, uh, and you will be amazed. You will not go to bed the same person, I promise you. So have a look at how these things work. And these ATP generators run on something very basic: oxygen and glucose in a very complex process, as I just tried to illustrate here. Even just to try and understand that diagram will take you quite a while. It took me quite a while, and I still don't understand it properly. So all these cells have to be supplied by the circulatory system, by the vascular system, and that vascular system we heard right at the beginning is of key importance for diabetes. Because by the time you have a symptom, already a lot of stuff has happened in your body. And that stuff that has happened in your body is poor blood circulation, especially at the microcirculation, which will cause energy shortage, which will mess up your cellular processes. Your cells go out of whack. The cell metabolism is now impaired. And over time, that ATP shortage becomes chronic. And as I said on the one slide, the body gives up. And as we're getting older, over 55, 60, the increase in dysfunctionings of more and more cells is really giving us big, big problems. And if it then hits a specific organ, and that can depend on genetic factors, but also lifestyle factors, then only do you get symptoms. Then only do you go to the doctor. One of the speakers told us that in Africa, in Tanzania or somewhere, 85% of the people with foot ulcers due to diabetes, when they arrive at the hospital, have to be amputated immediately because it's too late. The symptom is there, you can see the foot, but the problem was there long ago. So remember, 75% of your blood circulation, which is absolutely essential for you to survive, to live, to do what you're doing, that has to be in tip-top shape for everything. And it can be kept in tip-top shape. And if we do that, we stimulate the microcirculation, then we improve the essential supply and removal mechanisms for cells, which improves the biology, which improves the self-regulation and self-healing ability of the cell, of the body. How difficult can that be to understand? However, I want to make something very clear here. The Bemer does not replace diabetes medicine, but the treating medical practitioner will most likely reduce the dosage, and together with lifestyle adjustments, the diabetic may become medicine-free. We've seen it a few times now, so I'm telling you, do not reduce or stop medication under any circumstances. Let your medical practitioner, let your doctor decide on that. You don't decide on it. So how can we target prevention? Well, the first and most important thing I took from that conference was change your lifestyle, exercise more, eat the right stuff, and be aware that there is such a wicked thing called diabetes too. And every one of us, especially in the Western world, but for different reasons in rural Africa as well, has to be aware that it is creeping up on us. Slowly, slowly, slowly catch the monkey. And watch out for weight gain. The weight gain could be a reason to develop diabetes. It will make it more susceptible. On the other hand, if you gain weight, have a look what your diabetes markers look like. In South Africa, according to a speaker there at the conference, 86% of diabetics are not on target with any of these things: exercise, nutrition, awareness, and weight gain. They just ignore it because the foot isn't black yet. How can we target early treatment? By education. It came out over and over and over again that we must educate the people as to the seriousness of diabetes. The early awareness, I'm very glad with 63, I mean, it's maybe a bit late already, but I've now discovered it. I'm aware of it. Certainly, I will never be not aware of it anymore. But if we can get early awareness at a younger age, that'll be fantastic. Especially as parents, we could, imbibe it into our children. Early treatment, if we do develop something that already looks like a foot ulcer or something like that, and effective treatment, because it's not just a matter of a plaster or a couple of stitches or a couple of this or a couple of pills. Effective treatment is a big, complex, as you will see later, multidisciplinary team approach, and minimize the progression to diabetic neuropathy. Because once you're into that part of the disease, we're all in trouble, because neuropathy is a highly progressive um, situation and has to be reassessed continuously, as the medication that is used is sometimes very aggressive and can't be used forever and must be adjusted to preclude serious high-risk side effects. How can we target the treatment? Well, there must be proper wound healing strategies for diabetes, blood pressure reduction in general, maintain the glycemic target, in other words, the blood sugar levels, cholesterol levels. Do eye screen often. I mean, the eye surgeon said less than 50% even of diabetics receive ocular care. They just think it's part of aging that suddenly you need glasses every 6 months. It's not so. It's a result of the diabetic deterioration of the blood vessels. Have a foot inspection weekly. I mean, you can look at your own feet. Watch out for small injuries. And of course, the whole vascular assessment. It would be fantastic if we could just use the Bemer every day, then that part of the equation is out of it. So the requirements for vascular assessment are really that your heart is in order, that you don't get atherosclerosis, and improve the microcirculation. You hear that? Improve the microcirculation. 30 to 50% of diabetics with foot ulcers will be gangrenous. 23% will undergo immediate amputation when that happens. Those are shocking things, shocking. Very few people with amputations return to a normal life. Let's face it, if I had to lose a leg or a foot now, that would be really, really tough to get back to normal life. But with proper vascular evaluation and interventions, apparently diabetics had 57% less amputations in a 20-year study. I think it was conducted in the UK, if I remember correctly. If there's little or no pulse in your foot, it is most likely that the patient suffers an ischemic limb where the blood flow distribution in the lower limb has reached near catastrophic situation. That is scary, and that is something, and again, I don't want to scare you. I just want to scare you enough that you are aware of the bad consequences of this really wicked disease. Improve the circulation, improve the microcirculation so we can get more oxygen there, extract more oxygen, increase ATP production, and have more effective cell biology. You know, those are the typical statements of an engineer. We are just putting the facts down, and then many things can be sorted out because we have a self-healing, optimizing, self-regulating body. But that's essentially all the Bemer does. It's quantifiable, as I said, it's repeatable, it's consistent, it's quite ordinary in its sense of application. You just lie on the thing, you don't have anything connected to you, and these things will happen. So it's ordinary, but it's extraordinary in its effect. And it acts as the cause, not at the symptom. Remember, when you have the symptom, a lot of things have happened already. By acting at the cause, you can prevent a lot of things from happening. It's gentle and it's safe in the effect. There are no negative side effects. As impossible as that might sound to a conventional medical practitioner who knows that every form of medication has negative side effects. Just depends how high the dosage is. Not in the case of Bemer. The results are massive and life-saving. Of course, there is much more to it when it comes to understanding and treating diabetes. And I'm fully conscious that I, the technology guy, is trying to talk about something that he knows very little about. But hey, I understand principles, fundamentals, and I understand physics. But what we do need when it comes to understanding and treating diabetes, and I'm not again talking as a medical person, it is integrated treatment approach with an interprofessional team, not just specialist, one specialist, but lots of specialists in various things. People that understand wound care, wound treatment, wound healing. People that understand the benefit of hyperbaric chambers and how it can be integrated into all this. People who understand pressure points and footwear that has to be designed, podiatrists and so on. How to prevent ulcers if you are already a serious diabetic. The reconstructive surgery that has to be done, possibly on your vascular system, possibly on feet that are completely, broken as a result of the poor vascular situation. The consequences of amputation when it comes to that, the psychological impact, the lifestyle adjustment, the loss of income, the coping with the pain, and also the pain at home with the people around you, and the further progression of this disease are things that have to be considered and managed by specialists, but in team context. And the pain management, and the rehabilitation maybe, and the nutrition. There are lots of things. I don't know them all, but those are just a few things that I extracted from this conference. So for which other conditions will the Bemer work? Not just diabetes. Virtually all ailments where an improved microcirculation is a key parameter and where a strengthened immune system matters, for the reasons I've already given you. Can it be that simple? No, it's never simple. It isn't simple in this case either. The practical complexity of diabetes 2 is extremely difficult to understand. But it isn't so difficult to prevent, It isn't so difficult to treat if you have the right approach and the right infrastructure and so on. But the Bemer physical vascular regulation therapy can make an enormous difference. We know it does because we know a lot of people have already used it. The key areas then of Bemer in the diabetic application, and this is what we started off with, and then I'm almost done, is chronic pain management, wound management, vascular surgery, retinopathy, nephropathy, the kidney stuff, diabetes 2, and all its secondary ugly sisters that are associated with diabetes 2. Terrible sisters. Bemer is really something for everybody. It's available in South Africa for 14 years already. We've got a bit of a track record. It's 15 years old this year in November in Europe. The Bemer is used in over 40 countries. It's medically registered, as far as I know, last count in 20 countries, including major blocs like the EU, the United States, and in South Africa specifically. There are about 6,500 systems in use in South Africa, also on horses, by the way, and small animals, but that's an aside. And we have over 1 million applications worldwide daily. Now that's quite something remarkable too. And I have one last thought before we finish. When considering the potential investment in a Bemer system, because many people say, oh, it's so expensive and it's this and that and the other. It will be good to remember what the cost incurred for diabetic treatment, medication, likely surgery one day, and prosthesis might cost. Never mind the adjustment to your own lifestyle and the loss of income. It might be good to reflect on the words of Sir Bernard Shaw, who said, apparently, I marvel that society would pay a surgeon a large amount of money to amputate a leg, but spend very little to save it.